Hi, Nick.
Hello. Can you guys hear me this time?
Yes, so exciting.
Oh, good.
Thanks to everyone that's joined us so far. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining us for this webinar today. My name is Justice, and I'm the Community Outreach Intern with MadiSUN. In just a moment, I'll pass it over to my colleague Sam Deniski, who will be leading the presentation. The presentation will be about 30 minutes and will feature one of our installers, Full Spectrum Solar. Then we'll leave time at the end for an open question session. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, though, feel free to put them in the chat, use the Q&A function or the raise hand function, which should all be on the in the options on the menu bar, excuse me. We are recording this and it will be posted for our events page if you wish to rewatch or share any portion. And with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Sam.
Thanks, Justice. Thanks for that great introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight on this very lovely evening here in southern Wisconsin. Really appreciate you taking the time to come learn more about solar today. As Justice said, I am Sam Deniski. I am the Distributed Resources Director here with Renew Wisconsin. Renew Wisconsin is a renewable energy advocacy organization. We do we advocate for a renewable energy policy. We do renewable energy programs, and we also do renewable energy education as well. And Renew Wisconsin happens to administer the MadiSUN Solar programs on behalf of the City of Madison. So we have actually 3 programs. We have a group buy, which is I'm assuming what most of you folks are interested in tonight. That's our residential program. We also have a business program as well. And we have a program for nonprofit organizations and affordable housing providers to help all of those folks go solar. So like I said, I'm Sam. I'm the Distributed Resources Director, which basically means kind of smaller scale solar. So I've been here for about 3 years now. And I like to start off every presentation with this slide here, especially this photograph, I should say, in the middle. That is actually a photograph of my parents' solar array outside of Duluth, Minnesota. And I love to start out every presentation with this because those panels right there really demonstrate that solar is available, or as solar as possible just about anywhere, certainly anywhere here in southern Wisconsin too. So we'll get into more about that in a little bit, but I just want to kind of go through what our agenda is going to look like tonight. We're going to talk first of all a little bit about how solar power actually works. Thankfully, I have Nick Aitons here from Full Spectrum Solar, who is going to correct any mistakes that I might relay to you all and give you, more importantly, a little bit more detailed information about kind of the engineering and how the processes of the solar panels and the solar systems work. I'm going to talk a little bit too about why solar makes sense here in Wisconsin and in the Madison area specifically. And then we're going to talk more about solar economics and incentives too. We have an actual sort of a cost exercise that we're going to run through with, which is, I assume, what most people are interested in knowing about. How much is it going to cost? How much money is it going to save us, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end, we'll go over kind of how the purchasing process in general works and talk about some of the next steps to adoption if you are interested in that. And then we'll save about 15 minutes at the end, hopefully, for a question and answer session. That'll be with me and with Nick from Full Spectrum. And also we have a special guest on tonight, my colleague at Renew, Andrew Kell, who is Renew Wisconsin's policy analyst. So hopefully you all have some good policy questions for him. So that's what our agenda looks like tonight. Before we get into some of the meat and potatoes of that agenda, I kind of want to lay out, the benefits of why you're all here, or the benefits of joining a solar group buy. So what we do here at MadiSUN is we simplify the process. We want to make it as easy as possible for you all to get solar installed on your own home. We do things like we vet solar contractors. We make sure the folks you are getting are experienced, are qualified, are reputable. They're going to do a good job. They know the lay of the land in terms of how permitting and some of the other policies work as well. We also work to collectively bring everybody together at once. The more folks we can bring together, the more the better the price we usually get. So that's certainly a component as well. And we also provide sort of education or a consulting service as well. Solar, unfortunately, rooftop solar does not work for everyone. Me in particular, I'm looking out right now on my driveway, and I have 1, 2, 3 maple trees that unfortunately shade my house. So I cannot really do solar as it stands right now. And a lot of folks are in that same boat. So we can, kind of provide other options as well. If you're just starting down this path and you're kind of curious as to how it works, or if it can work, I should say, for your home. So we provide some details for that too, if unfortunately it doesn't work out for you. In general, like I said, we just make it really easy, and we're here to provide sort of, like I said, an extra layer of education. And that is part of what was not only such a great thing about a group buy, but especially a group buy that is run by and paid for by the City of Madison. So we want to talk now about how solar power actually works. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about solar electricity. It's people think it's a relatively new technology, but the solar PV process has actually been around for almost 100 years now. So it is a proven technology, but it's certainly really only come into the mainstream here over the last 10 to 15 years or so. And because of that, people think that there has to be a lot of components, a lot of things going on behind the scene, and that's not necessarily the case, thankfully. Outside of some wiring and a few other minor pieces of material, there's really only 2 main components to a solar PV system. And those 2 components are the solar module, which I'm sure most of you are very familiar with, or at least have seen before. The other is the inverter. And that inverter can take a couple of different forms. It can be sort of a standard inverter, which is what that looks like. That inverter is about the size of your electric panel box in your house. It can also take the form of micro inverters too, which are closer to or even sometimes attached to the solar module itself. Basically, no matter what kind of inverter you have, they do the same job. They convert direct current or DC electricity into alternating current or AC electricity. So the solar panels make direct current, but our homes, our lights, our appliances, things like that, they take alternating current or AC electricity. So it's absolutely necessary for us to have an inverter as part of our solar PV system to convert that electricity into a usable form that our phones and our TVs and dishwashers and things like that can use. The really cool thing about a lot of inverters now is they actually can do things like connect to monitoring equipment. And what I mean by that is can connect it to a phone app. I showed you a picture earlier of my family and my dad's solar array. My dad actually, when he got his solar array installed, went out and bought an iPhone so he could monitor his production. That is a really big deal if you don't know my dad, because he had one other cell phone before his iPhone before he upgraded. So he's not very technology savvy. But if you are technology savvy and you are, and you kind of like that, if you're a data nerd, there's a lot of monitoring equipment and a lot of other things you can kind of tap into now with these technologically updated inverters. And then of course, if you have micro inverters too, you can even kind of check out how each solar panel is doing throughout the day with that. Speaking of the solar panels, that is the other main component, of course, with our solar array, or our solar system, I should say, that, like I said, kind of does what you might think it would do. It converts sunlight into electricity. Solar panels don't really have any working components. It's a chemical reaction that takes place. Basically, there's two layers of silicon, and when the sun strikes that top layer, it excites the electrons in it. And then those electrons get kind of channeled into some wires, and then they basically go down into your inverter, and then they get converted, like I said, into alternating current, or the kind of electricity that you need to power your home. I once saw one of our other solar installers say that it was magic. I don't like to say that it's magic, but in a way, it almost kind of is magic. It's really a great technology, and the fact that it's a chemical reaction and that there are no working components means that these solar panels, there's not a lot of upkeep to them. They last a long time. All of the solar panels that are offered through our different installers all have a 25-year warranty. Just like a car or anything else that comes with a warranty, typically they can even last much longer than that too. So, a solar array installed today could last 30, maybe even 40 years. So there's very little upkeep, which is great. You don't have to do a lot of maintenance to these systems. So that's why they've become really, really attractive in the last few years. Solar modules typically come in two different sizes. One is the size of about your standard door. The other is about the same width, but slightly shorter. It's about 5 feet tall as opposed to 7 feet tall. And each one has a different number of solar cells. And the cells are those small square boxes you see within that solar panel. So the smaller panel will have 60 of those cells, or 60 of those squares, and a larger panel will have 72 of those solar cells in it. So it's a 72 cell versus a 60 cell. And there will be some wattage differences there, of course, just because one is physically bigger than the other. But for the most part, per square inch or whatever, they're going to basically make the same amount of electricity. So those are the two main components of a solar array. So now we're going to put them together and kind of show you how they work in action. So when we talk about solar, especially home solar, especially in Wisconsin, we're typically talking about what we call a grid-tied solar array. And that means you are still connected, to the electric grid. A lot of folks assume, or maybe have some sort of delusions of grandeur, that when they do a solar array or a solar panel system, that they're going to be off grid. That can happen. That is an option. A few things, though, you're going to need to consider if you are even kind of contemplating that is, first of all, it's going to be much more expensive. You're going to have a lot of battery backup components and things like that are going to increase the cost of your system. Deconnecting from the utility also has some cost built in as well. And perhaps more importantly, though, is you're going to have to make a lot of lifestyle changes too. The good thing about being connected to the grid, or having a grid-tied solar array, is the fact that basically your lifestyle, you don't have to make any big lifestyle changes. When the sun goes down at night, you don't have to switch on a battery. You don't have to think about, can I turn on my dishwasher? Can I turn on my washing machine? Things like that. you're just going to get electricity through the grid, which is great. So this is how a grid tied solar array works. So the sunlight hits those panels. Again, the panels create electricity. They flow down then to number 2, which is your inverter. That again converts the DC electricity to the AC, and then that flows out into your lights, your appliances, etc. And at times, especially in the summer, during the daytime and the afternoon hours, what's going to happen is after that electricity flows through your inverter and flows through your meter flows through your electric panel into your home. If all of your home's needs are being offset by your solar panels, what's going to happen then is step number 4 there, right in the center. The excess electricity is going to be sent back onto the grid. It's going to flow down the power lines to your neighbor, to your neighbor's neighbor, et cetera, et cetera. And then the good news, I should say, kind of the flip side of that coin, is when the sun goes down, or when your solar array is not producing enough electricity to offset all of the electricity being consumed by your home, then you will do number 5. You will take in electricity off the grid. And again, you will not be able to tell the difference. When you turn on Netflix at night to binge watch some shows, you're not going to be able to tell if those electrons are coming from the sun. Maybe if you do a battery backup from that, or just from the electric power grid as well. So it is really great in terms of, like I said, you really don't change up too many things in your lifestyle. It's basically a seamless system. Of course, the drawbacks to that would be when the electricity grid does go down, your electricity unfortunately goes down with it. Thankfully, there are some backup systems now, like I said, which involve a battery component, but not involve you completely detaching from the grid. So those are becoming more common now. Of course, if you do that, you are still going to increase the cost of your solar project by quite a bit. Even a relatively small battery backup system now can increase the cost of a system by $10,000 or more, which is in effect doubling the cost of a system. But those options certainly are there if that is a concern of yours. So in general, though, that's sort of how a solar array works, especially how a grid-tied solar array works. The other good thing about a grid-tied solar array, even if you don't have a battery backup component, is when you're putting that excess electricity onto the grid, your meter will essentially dial backwards. The utility is going to put in a new meter. Typically, they're digital meters, and those meters are going to, like I said, kind of dial backwards. And then at night, or cloudy days or other periods of time, when your solar array is not producing enough electricity and you have to take in electricity off the grid, then your meter is going to flow forward again. And at the end of the month, you just pay the net of that meter, and that's what we call net metering. So this is a fun little graphic I have to kind of show or demonstrate how net metering works. I apologize, the animation moves a little fast, but essentially this is what you kind of look at. During the day, when the sun's out, you're going to put more electricity on the grid, and that meter is going to, like I said, kind of dial backwards there like it is. And then at night, when you have to take in electricity off the grid, it'll turn forward again like it normally does. So net metering is really great. It kind of acts in a sense like a virtual battery. So, at least in terms of where your electricity bill stands, it definitely acts like a battery. And the good thing is, I don't know where folks are, if you're an Alliant customer, or an MGE customer, or maybe a municipal co-op in the area. The good thing about this is not only you can bank electricity during sunny days and kind of save it for nights and for cloudier days as well. If you're an MG&E customer, you can actually roll that over month to month, which is really great. So we like to say it's like rollover electricity for those of us that are old enough to remember when there were rollover minutes on a cell phone. But that's in a nutshell how net metering works. There's of course a lot of nuances. Every Wisconsin utility is different in how they credit you or bill you for that net metering, and we can get into those details certainly later on as well. But that's kind of a 10,000 foot view of what net metering looks like. And here is maybe even a better, more visual representation of what net metering looks like. So this is an actual graph from a real solar user. So that area in red there, that's where this person's home is consuming electricity in real time. So this is a snapshot of midnight here, or 1 in the morning or so to midnight at the end of the day. So as you can see, their home kind of, there's some spikes here in electricity. This could be, maybe a refrigerator powering on, or possibly even an air conditioning unit. And the area in green is where this person's solar array is activated. And then, as you can see, the area in blue, that's where that electricity that the solar array makes is being used in real time. So as you can see, there's a lot of places in here where the solar that's being produced is not actually being used, and it's actually going back out onto the grid. Especially here during the kind of the noon to 2 o'clock hours, a lot of extra electricity being produced there that's not being consumed in real time. But this person is receiving credits for that as well. And then, as you can also see too here, around 10 or 11 a.m., this person was, I don't know, maybe washing the dishes or something, and their usage actually spiked to more than what their solar array was using, but it was okay. They just supplemented it through the grid. So as you can see here, the area in blue, or the area where this person is consuming their solar energy in real time, is quite small. There's a lot of green area and a lot of red area. And the good thing about net metering is we can basically kind of take that area under the green curve and kind of, massage it out, or kind of smush it into those areas in the red and offset that electricity that's being used. So this is a nice visual representation that I like to use to kind of show people, at least in a day timeline, kind of how net metering works. It gets obviously a lot more tricky when you start talking about how net metering works over several days or weeks or even months or even years, but that should give you a good idea of how it works, at least on a day-to-day basis. The last thing I want to talk about when we're talking about how solar actually works is what your rooftop needs to look like. First thing we look at when we're evaluating homes is how shaded the roof is. If you have trees that are blocking your view, unfortunately, like I do right now, which is great, it's not going to be great for solar electricity production, unfortunately. So that's the first thing we look at, how shaded your roof is. Second thing we look at typically is actually how new your roof is. This is really important because, like I said, those solar panels are warranted for 25 years. So we expect them to last at least that long, if not, like I said, closer to 30 or maybe even 40 years. And that length of time is typically as long, if not longer, than your standard shingled roof. So we want folks to go in with as new of a roof as possible. You can certainly repair or reshingle your roof during the lifespan of your solar panels. However, you're going to have to hire someone to come and disconnect those items, shut off the electricity, remove the panels, reshingle the roof, and then reattach and then reconnect those solar panels. So it is possible, but it's definitely going to eat into your investment. Certainly it's going to extend or make longer your return on investment. So we typically, tend to tell people, if your roof is already, 15, 20 years or older, definitely want to consider purchasing a new roof first before you put your solar panels in. East to west roofs are now okay. This is actually kind of really only come on in the last 5 to 7 years or so. 10, 20 years ago, you pretty much had to have a roof that faced due south. Thankfully, with improvements in technology and with some of the net metering policies, this is not necessarily the case anymore. The more efficient panels can gather enough electricity, even if they face due east or due west during the course of a normal sunny day, to offset close to, if not, pretty close to your entire load throughout the day. So east-west roofs are now okay as long as you are unshaded. And then the last thing, but certainly not the least important thing that I want to mention, is you want an energy efficient home, especially from an electricity standpoint. It's really important to have an energy efficient home too, in terms of heating and cooling. But we're talking about, if you have appliances that are really old and out of date, you definitely want to think about replacing those. Of course, the heating and cooling can also come into play, during these times of year, especially in the last week. If your air conditioning unit is going to have to be running 100% all of the time, because you have a home that maybe isn't as efficient as it could be, maybe it doesn't have as much insulation, that's definitely going to consume a lot of electricity and either require you to purchase a larger array, or it's not going to offset as much electricity as you could. So energy efficiency is really important. Definitely wanting to look into any electricity energy efficiency measures as well. That kind of concludes the how solar works portion of the discussion. I want to give Nick an opportunity here to weigh in, to correct any mistakes that I have, and also to take a quick sip of water. So Nick, anything to add to any of those slides that I talked about?
Well, I would say that I agree with pretty much everything that you've said. I could just add some very minor points here. So one thing that's, if anyone is interested in, doing any renovations or what might be beneficial, an electrical panel is one thing that we look at we take a look at every single install. Having a higher amperage electrical panel and a higher bus bar rating on the panel is beneficial. Another thing is, what you might hear occasionally is a word called optimizers. Those are used, there's an electronic device that are used with the larger inverter size, and they function as somewhat similar to a micro inverter. So if you see someone talking about optimizers, that's it's a sun optimization feature, electricity optimization feature per module or per panel. Another thing I'd say is just kind of to emphasize, I know Sam said this, but panel and module, you might hear interchangeably. I'll often use the word module when I'm describing things, but it's the same as a single panel for a roof installation. I'd say other than that, everything is, I'll just give it back to Sam at this point.
Great, thanks, Nick. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I do tend to use module and panel interchangeably, so I apologize if I do that, but yeah, just know that if I'm talking about one or the other, they basically mean the same thing. They just mean those units you see right there in front of you. So we're going to talk a little bit now about why solar makes sense. First and foremost, solar now has become quite affordable for most folks. The costs of a residential solar array have dropped anywhere from 70 to about 75% since 2010. A lot of those costs have come down kind of on the technology side. We have one of my other colleagues in the office just brought in some of his old solar panels from his first solar array, which is about 10 years old. And those panels were about 190 watts each. And now panels are typically close to, if not over 400 watts each. So almost roughly the same, footprint, or the same two-dimensional area is now creating, twice as much electricity as it did before. Perhaps though, the bigger reason why that cost has come down is just due to economies of scale. As we see countries like China, Germany, South Korea, other companies produce in mass these solar panels now, that has allowed for the price to come down quite a bit. So this right here is a graph that shows us the cost of where solar has gone in the last decade. That's the yellow line. And kind of corresponding with that, how much solar as a country we have installed over the last 10 years. So something to keep in mind if you're looking at the figures, especially on the right side, that is the price per watt. This also includes utility scale solar installations as well, which can definitely skew that price a little bit on the lower end. As I said, talking about economies of scale, those types of large scale solar installations will definitely drive the price down. But the important thing to remember is that residential solar has come down about 70 to 75% in cost over the last decade or so. The other reason solar is important, as you can tell, or why solar made sense, I should say, and as you can tell, I like GIFs and moving images, is because it's become a lot more reliable. You know, I've talked about how much the technology and the efficiency of the panels has improved over the last decade or so. But another misconception that folks have is, you know, they see these panels and they think it's kind of maybe just a light sheet of glass. It's really actually a hard sort of a plastic material. Nick can probably elaborate a little bit more on this if he wants, but the important thing here is that they are a lot more sturdy than I think a lot of people think. They can withstand some pretty large hail. They can withstand hurricane strength winds, and they also do shed snow on their own to some degree. Now, if we did a big snowstorm, especially a big snowstorm followed by a cold snap, there definitely will be some snow on those panels that won't melt. And it might even take a few days or even up to a week for that snow to eventually melt and slide off of the panels. However, it does always melt and slide off, typically much quicker than just another part of your roof would do. So we really want to emphasize to folks that, you know, if you do get some snow on your panels, and it's going to happen, especially in Wisconsin, especially in, you know, in January and February, just leave it on there. You know, the panels are a darker color. There's always at least a little bit of electricity kind of flowing through them. So they typically stay at warmer temperatures. Because they're also, you know, mounted to your roof, they're on an incline, so they're gonna slide off too. Especially once you get just a little bit of that panel showing, it's gonna heat up the rest of the panel, and eventually that snow is gonna slide off. But it is true, when we get snow on there, those panels are not gonna make electricity. Thankfully, though, our installers, when they're doing the modeling of how much electricity your solar array is expected to make throughout the course of a year, or throughout the course of several years, our installers actually do kind of factor that snow cover into their mix. So you don't have to worry too much about that having a big effect on your utility bills, at least not over a long period of time. If you're talking, you know, by days or even by months, it's gonna come into play a little bit, but you have to think about this over the long term. Another reason why solar makes sense, it helps our local economy. These are jobs that definitely cannot be outsourced. We need folks like Nick and his colleagues on the ground, actually, or maybe not on the ground, on the roofs, installing these systems. So thankfully, solar installers and the solar industry here in Wisconsin was one that was not affected too much by the pandemic. In fact, we actually grew jobs a little tiny bit here in Wisconsin over the last 12 months. So really great news there. And by, you know, doing a solar array with one of our contractors, all of which are local, by the way, you're definitely going to help out the local economy there as well. And then finally, last thing I want to mention here on this part of the talk is it's going to increase the value of your home as well. So this was a study done out of Colorado from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I think this was done about 3 or 4 years ago, and it said that solar homes or homes that were outfitted with solar sold for faster and for more money than an equivalent home. So what this means is, let's say you and your neighbor across the street are both selling your home at the same time. Your homes are roughly the same age, the same size, things like that. If your home has solar on it and your neighbor's does not, yours is going to sell faster and for more money than your neighbors. And it made sense because, you know, if you're a prospective home buyer and you're looking at homes and one has a electricity bill that's, you know, maybe $20 a month, and the other has a utility bill that's, you know, $150 per month, you're definitely going to gravitate towards that home that is going to require less money to be put into it over a long period of time. So again, this is not a study that was done out of Wisconsin, but we're hopefully going to see some studies that will confirm it in the next, hopefully in the next short period of time. So, you know, whether it's helping the local economy, whether it's adding value to your own home, whether it's, you know, saving money on your electric bill, definitely lots of reasons to install solar. And now we're going to talk about the main one, which is the economic side of the equation. So I talked a lot about how the cost of solar has come down quite a bit over the last decade, but still is certainly not free. But the good thing is there are a lot of incentives and rebates and other things like that that can help you with some of those upfront costs. We also, I should point out, before I even get into this, before I forget, there are financing options now for solar as well. And Justice can put some of that information in the chat room as well. So if you're interested in financing a system, there's some really great rates right now too. So you don't necessarily have to have all the money up front. So just wanted to mention that before I forgot. But kind of shifting back, I want to talk about some of the upfront incentives and rebates that folks could qualify for. The first is from the Focus on Energy program. That's a statewide Wisconsin energy efficiency program. They offer rebates and incentives and programs for a plethora of different energy efficiency measures, one of which is for solar. So you can get, if your home qualifies, you can get a $500 rebate for that. If you live in a rural residence or a select rural zip code, you can actually get up to $1,000 rebate for that as well. Again, you do have to qualify for that, which means your roof has to be less than 10% shaded. And it also has to face, the area, I should say, that where you're putting the panels on has to face either east, west, or south. Basically anywhere between due east and due west, all the way down to the south. So as long as your rooftop doesn't face northwards and it is less than 10% shaded, you should be able to qualify for a Focus on Energy rebate. Perhaps maybe more importantly, or certainly a larger figure for most folks, is the solar federal investment tax credit. This tax credit is really important because it makes up 26% of the cost. And thankfully, late last year, Congress extended those tax credits. They were at 30% in 2019. They got reduced down to 26% last year in 2020, and they were scheduled to go down to 22% this year. But thankfully, as I said, Congress extended those credits. So they will remain at 26% both this year and next year. And then in 2023, they will sort of resume their reduction schedule, if you will. And then in 2024, for residential installations, they will go away completely, unless, of course, Congress acts again to extend or possibly renew or even increase those credits. So definitely something to consider there. Of course, you have to pay in enough in federal taxes to receive that credit. The good news is if you don't, it's from one year to the next, you can actually roll those credits over. So let's say your solar system would allow you to get a $1,500 tax credit and you only pay in $1,000 that year. What you can do is you can get that $1,000 back the first year, and then you can roll over the $500 or whatever the remaining value is for the next year. And if you still don't have enough a tax appetite, you can actually roll it over again and again and again until you finally sort of met that tax appetite. So really important piece of the puzzle here, piece of the financial puzzle, is the solar investment tax credit. So now that we kind of have some of the lay of the land here, we can do a cost exercise. So typically, I didn't really get into this before, but I should say every single solar installation is going to be sized specifically for a home's use. For the purposes of this cost exercise, what I did was just took the average size array in the Madison area, which is about 5 kilowatts. Again, though, I really want to stress that every home is going to be sized differently, but just for math purposes, I use this sort of hypothetical 5 kilowatt array size. So like I said, not only is every array going to be sized exactly to your home's needs, but also depending on which company you use, which solar contractor, which materials you use, the price is going to vary a little bit. But the average price for a 5 kilowatt array system through the MadiSUN program is about $14,500. If you qualify for a Focus on Energy rebate, that takes off $500. The federal investment tax credit would remove another $3,600, and that would leave you with an out-of-pocket cost of just a little over $10,000. So we take, again, this hypothetical 5 kilowatt array. basically reduce it by close to 30%, not quite 30%, but reduce it by almost a third. So there's definitely a lot of incentives out there. Again, each home is going to be a little bit different, of course, but this is kind of just a general cost exercise to kind of give you an idea of how much a system is going to cost. So, $10,000 for, like I said, is definitely not free, which is why it's really great that we have incentives and things like that. But it's really not that far off from other sort of home remodel projects or other home installation projects. So now that we know also the sort of a baseline value of how much our solar array is going to cost, we can actually do another exercise to show what the value is of that solar energy. So I took that same sort of hypothetical or average 5 kilowatt solar array. Typically in Wisconsin, especially this part of the state, we see about 1,300 hours of production time per year. So this means basically about 1,300 sunny hours or 1,300 hours of sunshine in Wisconsin. That will equal 6,500 kilowatt hours of electricity production per year. And kilowatt hours is how the utility charges you for your electricity bill each month. So if we know our system is going to produce, again, on average, this is taking an average sunny year and an average sized array. This is sort of like what we can predict our annual offset to be. And if you're in Madison gas and electric territory, again, that's going to be different if you're in Alliant territory versus if you're on a municipal or a co-op utility. But basically, that annual savings or that solar energy value for that hypothetical array works out to over $800 if you're in an MG&E territory, about $700 if you're an Alliant customer, and then a little bit less if you're on like a Wanatee municipal co-op utility or like a Sun Prairie municipal. Good news about that is it means typically you're normally spending a lot less on your electricity than an MG&E customer or an Alliant customer. So again, these numbers are going to vary by quite a bit depending on the size of the array, depending on what kind of weather patterns even we get in a year. And it also, of course, depends on how you use your electricity yourself too, or how you consume it. So with that, we can kind of run a cost exercise. So if we know the total cost of our array, if we know about how much we're saving on that array in general, we can calculate our return on investment period or our payback period. Typically, most residential arrays will pay for themselves in about 10 years. Some can be sooner, some can definitely be later, especially if you're shaded or if we have, like a cloudy year or something like that. That time of that payback period can be reduced further if you go to something called a time of use rate. And basically what that means is your utility is going to charge you a different rate depending on what time of the day it is. If it's during the day or in the afternoon hours, they're going to charge you a much higher rate to use electricity or to consume electricity than you would at night or in the morning. So if folks are savvy and they're on time of use rates, they can reduce that payback period down to 7 or 8 years. So again, it's really highly dependent on many things, but I've definitely heard folks say that they have and will be paying their systems off in less than 10 years and really closer to like 7 or 8 years. The other good thing too is, of course, if it takes you about 10 years to pay off your system, that same hypothetical 5 kilowatt array will result in $20,000 plus in savings over the total lifespan of the system. So definitely some big savings to be had. And this, of course, doesn't even take into account rises in utility rates as well. So if utility rates do rise, definitely expect those to rise in the next few years. By how much is, of course, going to be very hard to tell. But that could even create for a shorter or a faster return on investment period. So we're just still got about 15-20 minutes left, which is great. So I just want to kind of walk you through now the steps to installing. If you have not The first step is to sign our I'm interested form. If you've done that already, great. If you haven't, definitely do that. After that, we will contact you. Either myself or my colleague Justice will give you a phone call. We'll discuss your electricity use. We'll talk about your roof. We'll give you some ballpark figures on system size, the costs involved, and some of the potential rebates that you might be able to get. If all of those sound good, what we do is we schedule a site assessment with one or more of our solar contractors. This is a really exciting year because typically with a group buy, it's just one contractor, one type of solar panel, which makes it really great for decision making. It really simplifies the process, of course, for the homeowner. But we definitely wanted to provide options this year because first of all, we've expanded the program countywide, and second of all, we just want to make sure that folks get some kind of say in the matter as well. So if our sort of pre-assessment from MadiSUN looks good, what we do is we refer you to one of our contractors. They will come out, do a full proposal for you, which will detail the exact size of the system, the exact cost, and we'll give you, a better idea on the potential rebates that could be in store as well. From that point on, it turns into a proposal, generally about a week or two later, that will, like I said, kind of detail all of those items that I just talked about. If that looks good, then a contract is issued. And then if once you sign the contract, then the array will get installed. So the total time that it takes from, bullet point number 1 here to number 6 generally is about 2 to 3 months. Of course, that time period can be shortened or extended depending on what time of the year it is, depending on which solar firm you choose to go with. Nick, do you know roughly what is the weight, if you will, or the total time frame that someone might be looking at if they've just signed up today?
Sure, yeah. So it would depend on a few factors, one of which is your location. So if you're going to be so a lot of the wait time is dependent on permitting, if working with utilities, and your municipality. So if you're an Alliant customer, they can take up to a month just to get their permitting pushed through. So that is a little bit of a delay there. If you're an MG&E customer and you need an outage, that at the moment is looking, 4 to 6 weeks for a lot of locations in Madison. So if you need any sort of electrical work on, if for instance you want to increase your electrical panel or your load center, or your meter needs to move, that occasionally is a consideration, then that's gonna change. Otherwise, you're talking maybe a couple weeks for running the paperwork through, and then another week or two to get the all the electricians and the roof crew scheduled for your location. And as the year goes on, things will get busier, as we've talked about incentives and benefits from taxes. So you'll see a significant number of people waiting towards the end of summer and into fall. And in fact, what ends up happening is, November is one of our busiest times of year, despite the fact that it's one of the darker times of year, because, we've had just a lot of people in the queue. So right now I'd say, maybe a month to 2 months. And later I might say, it might be 3 months closer to fall. So.
Great, thanks. Really appreciate that. Also want to give Andrew, my colleague, the chance to weigh in. Andrew, I didn't talk a lot about policy, but if I made any policy errors, please correct me at this point. Anything you would like to add about net metering or any of those other issues that were brought up?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, no misstatements whatsoever. You did a really good job explaining, the buyback rate's essentially what the utility will pay you, especially under a net metering arrangement. The only thing of significance to add from a policy perspective is that the Public Service Commission right now does have an investigation open for the major investor-owned utilities like MG&E and Alliant to look at the parallel generation, what is called buyback rates, essentially what they pay for excess electricity that's generated beyond net metering specifically. That investigation could take quite a while, so there's no real use in speculating what the outcome will be at this point, but it's definitely something that we're monitoring at Renew Wisconsin and giving our comments and input at that commission investigation.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, what we do, I shouldn't say what we do, what folks like Nick at Full Spectrum do is they try to size your array to about 95% of your usage in ideal situations. It doesn't, of course, have to be to that size exactly. You know, it depends on your utility. It depends on a whole slew of factors. But typically, we try to aim for just a little bit under your full usage, because if you do kind of creep into that territory of you're typically what they call an overproducer, that rate that they will reimburse you for is a much lower rate than what they charge you for. It's a wholesale rate versus a retail rate, and it's really hard to make the economics work. Nick, I probably butchered that. Do you have anything to add there as to how you guys typically size array and maybe try to avoid some of those overproduction scenarios?
I definitely agree with the 95% for MG&E customers. That's pretty close to what we'll do. If it's an Alliant customer, they're more month to month, and so you'll have more overproduction in the summer and underproduction in the winter, which you won't get the cost benefit because there's not month to month rollover. So for Alliant, we'll usually size closer somewhere in the 80 to 90% range. So because it's what Sam was saying, more cost beneficial. And yeah, you can if you really want to, you can overproduce, but yeah, it's I mean, you'll be getting back 2 cents per kilowatt hour, 3 cents maybe if you're in 2 cents for MG&E, 3 cents for Alliant. Excuse me, per kilowatt hour, where you'll be charged 11 or 13 cents. So yeah, not really that beneficial.
Great, thanks. So yeah, so we have reached the Q&A portion. I didn't see any questions in the chat, but if you have any, certainly put them in now. Or we have a pretty small group too. So if you want, you can of course just raise your hand, and we can even call on you that way too. So I'm going to unshare my screen here so can all see us. Nick, Andrew, if you're available to show your cameras as well, that's fine. Otherwise, no need there. But yeah, if there are any questions, we can definitely take them now. Nick, I did have one other question for you, and that is a lot of folks are interested in EV charging right now. And how does that work with solar? Do you typically add on panels? Do you need any special components to charge an EV? How does that look?
So yeah, we that's another consideration where you're looking into your panel size and how many breakers you have. You can install an EV charger that's connected to your inverter. However, it's become less recommended as time goes on, as inverters that are connected to inverters that are also EV chargers are less powerful now than chargers that are not connected. I would say that if you want to have an EV, it depends on how many, like any car, how many miles you're going to drive, how often you're going to be going around town. The one thing you don't have to worry as much about is road trips, as for those you won't be charging at home. I would say that a lot of our customers increase around 4 kilowatts for an EV in their solar array size. Again, dependent on the customer, dependent on how much roof space you have too. Sometimes you have a limited roof space, so it's nice to do them at the same time, but it's not required by any means.
Excellent. Yeah, another question I feel like we get a lot is people are very interested in the Tesla solar not solar panels, the solar tiles. I don't think you guys use them, but do you know much about that technology?
So one thing I would say is that technology it looks really cool, and I think eventually there's a significant likelihood we'll go in that direction. Right now, it's very early stage. In fact, Tesla just about a month ago had to go back to a lot of their customers and say, oh, by the way, this is more expensive than we thought. Even though you've already signed a contract, we're going to increase the cost of your system. We don't ever do that unless we've like told you specifically that might happen with a roof reinforcement. That's the only reason there'll be a cost increase for a system, and we're very clear about that when we go and look at your house. We'll say, hey, your roof might require this later. It's the type of thing that there are thousands of connections as opposed to 20 modules maybe on your roof. There are thousands of tiles. It's basically a roof and a solar array combined, along with a lot of electrical work. I don't think there are any installers in Wisconsin at the moment who are able to install Tesla, and you have to be a larger contractor to be able to do that. Normally I think it's pretty much, you'll see it maybe in California right now, and it's very early stages. Hopefully that will be something that we'll see more of. It looks great. But at the same time, the modules that we're installing, their visualization has been improving over time. They're more flush with the roof. They, are more seamless. In fact, if you start seeing more people with metal roofs, you don't even need to have that many. You don't need. You can sometimes get away with no penetrations in the roof whatsoever, and so you can actually have a more secure roof system in that way. So perhaps it'll move in that direction, but it's significantly more ways out than an electric car is at the moment.
Awesome, thanks. Justice, have we had any questions come in? Either, sorry, I still can't
Sure.
see for some reason the chat or the
Yeah,
raise
no
hand
problem.
function or anything like that.
Yeah, so we have one question from Christopher who
Okay.
says, where are the panels made and what is the warranty on the panels?
Nick, I'll let you handle that since you can talk specifically about the panels that Full Spectrum uses.
Sure, yeah. So a lot of the panels or the modules that we use, so the cells themselves, you can't get cells that are made in the United States right now, but you can get certain modules that are made in the US, and you can get others that are made elsewhere, other countries. We often use a one called Helene. It's manufactured in Minnesota. It's a Canadian company. They create the module or the panel, the frame, the backing, the assembly. They don't make the cells themselves; those are imported. But it's more than 50% of the materials. So technically, they are made in the United States. At that point, it's really nice. We can do more volume purchasing from them. There are other modules, though, if you're not interested in an American-made module, that we can get in bulk as well, especially through the group buy, that are a little bit cheaper. So there are some benefits. Different modules are, have a little bit of a different level of production or warranty. I think that you were specifically asking about warranty. Almost all modules have a 25-year life production warranty. The Helenes have a 15-year manufacturer's defect warranty. Some other modules will have a 25-year warranty. I think that's where the industry is going. I think there are some others that have a 10-year warranty for defects. Most of the time you'll see the defects early on, but just to be clear that there are some differences there. The production is starting to be more of an issue. You'll see different ones labeled as, closer to an 83% production level, or maybe even a 92% production. That's at a 25-year period. So you'll still have that percent of the initial rated production at that point in time, which is, I think, a great thing, just to say, hey, not only are the panels more efficient, but they'll last longer at the higher efficiencies.
Yeah, and I believe our other installers are using a combination. I think Nick kind of demonstrated pretty easily there that you can kind of, to some extent, you know, there are options. I believe our other installers are using panels that are either made in Canada, in Germany, or in South Korea. I think there might also be a Chinese module as well, but for the most part, I think they're either South Korean or German for our other installers out there as well. So yeah, so just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, great, thanks. We also have another question. How many inverters do you typically have in a 5 kilowatt system? And another question, do panels lose efficiency over time?
Yeah, I'll let you take that one, Nick. You can kind of talk about, you already talked about the efficiency and the loss of production, but can you talk a little bit more about the inverter question?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk a little bit. So number of inverters would depend on if you're using micro inverters or a string inverter. If you want to use a string inverter, you will use one string inverter for almost all systems. That's not always true. I did have an exceptionally large system that I was working on recently that was 19.5 kilowatts DC that required 2 string inverters. But otherwise, that's just very unusual. Most of the time, for a 5 kilowatt system, you'll have one inverter. For if it's a string inverter, if you have micro inverters, you'll have one inverter per module, and you'll have somewhere in the range of 12 to maybe 16 modules, depending on the efficiency of the modules. As Sam said, some are 60 cell, some are 72 cell. So it's not just how efficient at converting light to electricity, it's how large they are. So yeah, somewhere in the range of 12 to 16 for microinverters.
Great. Awesome. So I see we're at time, but I'm fine staying on. Nick, are you, and Andrew, and also are you fine staying on? I see there. I finally figured out we do have some more questions, but I just want to make sure you two are okay to stay on if we go a little over.
Sure.
Okay, Justice, what's the next question then?
Yeah, so next from Amanda, is there any provision for the scenario where the installer is no longer in business in the future, and is the warranty with the manufacturer directly?
Yeah, I'll let Nick handle that. I just want to throw in the caveat that Full Spectrum has been around for some time, so we definitely expect them to, but that would fall, it depends on the defect, of course, right, Nick?
Yeah, it definitely does. So I would say that we've been around since 2001. So no, 2002, sorry, 2002. So close to 20 years now. We have no plans of going anywhere. And even if there is a company, even if one of the companies you see in this group buy program goes away, generally, if a company kind of dissolves, it's understood to the other companies in the area that you should try to sustain the mission. And so there was a company called H&H that went under some number of years ago, and we regularly service their installs. And so if I think that's less of an issue than it might appear. If a company goes under, I think a lot of the other companies will say, hey, we want to have a little bit of goodwill in the industry to continue. We don't want to have these people just be dropped. We want to continue to service them. Generally, you don't service another company's array if they're still in business, because you're probably a little bit more expensive. It's kind of frowned upon, but if the company goes under, it's encouraged to help sustain that solar array through the lifetime. One thing I would like to add, speaking of sustaining a system, we do on occasion service installs where the roof needs to be replaced, and we will come out and replace the array at that point in time, remove it, put it back. It's not cheap, as Sam said, but it is possible. So if you're looking for something like that, that's something that you can continue to contact the same group, the same installers for.
Great, thanks. Justice, are there any other questions that have come in?
Not that I can see. So if anyone wants to put some lingering questions in the chat or the Q&A function, or I also allowed all folks to talk, so you can unmute yourself if you'd like. Feel free.
Okay, great. Well, I put our emails up on the board there, but if you definitely have any other questions later on, certainly feel free to email myself or Justice. Just want to thank again Nick and Andrew for helping me out tonight, and thanks to all of our guests who attended as well. And really appreciate all of the great conversation, and hopefully we can end and get out and enjoy a very pleasant evening. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks.